Okay, so now that we've created a resource group, we're going to try something a little harder, not much, but we're going to go ahead and create our data lake resource. If you're unfamiliar with what a data lake is, essentially you could think of it here. Let's draw it up really quickly. You could think of it as just a giant file storage container, a hard drive, a virtual hard drive, whatever it may be. And we talked about this earlier. It's the location where all of your data points, no matter whether they're structured or unstructured, are going to be stored. So you're going to be talking about your databases, you're going to be talking about your JSON files, really anything. Some CSV files. What else? Some videos and text files. And through the rest of this lab, we'll build some ETLs to load this data lake. But again, since storage is so cheap, we're able to grab these types of data points and store them in this giant lake of data without having to worry about any complex transformations in this initial phase. The goal is just grab as much as you can and get it stored. So let's go ahead and see how we could create that resource here in Microsoft Azure. It's going to be pretty straightforward. So one thing too, though, is that we are not going to look for a data lake. The reason we're not is that there were some original Gen 1 items that Microsoft Azure used, but going forward, this basic storage accounts were beefed up, for lack of a better phrase, to serve as data lake buckets. And these are going to allow you to store blob storage, file systems. It's overall just a lot more flexible. So again, simply we're going to click on Add here, which will take us to our Add section, and your subscription. Again, we're going to leave that as your basic dev test. And in your resource group, we're going to use the new resource group that we created earlier in the previous lab. So we're going to want to give this an account name. So there are some naming conventions here that are a little bit more stricter. So we're not going to be able to use our underscores again, and we're going to want to keep it down to a certain amount of characters. So we are just going to call this training SA for storage account, and then your name. It looks like that one's been taken, I think, from a previous lab I was designing. And again, we're going to leave it in, we're going to move this to USES2 to match our resource group. We're going to leave this standard. There's some performance differences, but everything we need, especially in this lab, is going to be more than enough for standard. But even in production environments, standard's a pretty good place to start. You can change these later on, so it's not too big of a deal. And we're going to use, again, V2, which gives us some more data warehousing flexibility on the way we store data. And we're going to leave the access tier as hot, which means the data is a little quicker to get back and forth opposed to cool, which does save some cost. But I think as time recording this lab, I believe it's $23 a month for every terabyte of data. So, even if you're using a few gigabytes of data, you're talking about a few cents a day to store that information. So again, that's why data lakes are so powerful. They're very cheap, and you can store massive amounts of data quickly and blindly, and push all of your transformation logic downstream to your data warehouse layer. So we'll click review and create, a little review process, and we will hit create. Here we go. So it's going to start showing the deployment process. This will take a little bit of time. And I'm not going to make you watch all of this, so I will fast forward through this in the lab. And when it is done, we will look at the newly created data lake object. All right, so it looks like our data lake resource has been created. Let's jump over to it. And we just want to look at a few things here to talk through what's been created. So Storage Explorer does come default in the portal. There is also an application version, which does make life a little bit easier. but again, just for the sake of this lab, we'll stick to what's here in the portal. And later in the lab, we'll look at access keys. Access keys are how you're gonna be able to access your lake. Again, you'll want to be careful on clicking on that and sharing that, because there is a lot of security of people being able to upload data to and from your lake if that access key does leak out. So for the sake of this lab, jumping ahead, we're going to want to create some folders to store some of the information that we're going to be putting in here. So it's a good time to just go ahead and do that now. So if you right click on your blob container, we're going to create a brand new container. And you'll want to give it a name. And we're going to call this one root as a root folder. It's going to be private, so no anonymous access. It will create. And if you click on that, there are going to be, here's your storage explorer. So we're going to want to create 2 folders here just to get some placeholder folders in place for our ETL steps, which will be coming next. So let's go ahead and create a folder. And it's important to note that when you create folders, Azure or the storage container won't actually physically create them until you put a file in place. So in the lab, just to make life easier, I've included a placeholder file in the lab section. So it's just great to kind of get some of those just files loaded in place so you could actually see and navigate through this. So let's go ahead and just upload that really quick by clicking on the upload. We're going to select a file and we will navigate to our data files. And let's go ahead and upload the placeholder file here. Now we'll overwrite in case it exists, placeholder file. And then we're going to want to create a new folder, and the first folder is going to be called raw, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drop in, upload a file into raw which is our placeholder file as well. And when that's done, let's jump back to root. So we have a raw folder, and let's go ahead and do the same thing and create a folder called staging. And we'll add our placeholder file here as well. Doing that. All right. And so now we have 2 folders, raw and staging. And the reason we do that is when we do our initial ETL from our raw sources, we're going to just drop them into the raw folder. Like I said, very little, we want to do very little ETL. We just want to grab all the information, store it there. But then through our ETL processes, before we push data to the data warehouse, you'll want an area where you can do some aggregation, some cleaning, and put it into the staging environment for it to be picked up from there. In some of the documentation you'll find online, you'll see it called your bronze data lake versus your silver data lake versus your gold. And there's a couple different mechanisms, but the overall messaging is that you grab the data, store it in raw, and then do some processing and get those files a little bit cleaner so that when they get picked up by the data warehouse or the data scientist or anyone downstream, it's just a little easier for them to work with that data. And with that wraps up us creating a data lake and getting some basic framework in place.